Good evening, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Maybe. Yeah, right. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started and want to open up with prayer requests, as we always do. What can we be praying about today?
Back. We need to pray that this goes away. So.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Mary's Farm is going to be flying to Michigan, and then she'll be back Saturday. Her last aunt passed away, so she's going up for the funeral. And Ron will be staying here.
It's not a prayer request, but I want to wish a very happy birthday to Dave today. So I was going to sing to you at dinner, but I decided to spare you. But I want to say happy birthday anyway. So. But, all right, well, if there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and get started. Father God, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for our time together, and pray that as we look at a story that most of us have probably heard before, that you would help us to see it in a way that would open our eyes to the love that you have for us and the love that you want us to have for others. God, we want to pray tonight specifically for Z and her back, and just pray for relief for her, and just pray that you would help her through this and give her body the strength it needs. We also want to pray for Mary Spar as a couple of ways with, one, the loss of her aunt, our last aunt. Just pray that you would bring her comfort as she grieves that loss, but also as she travels to be there for the funeral, and just pray that you'd give her safe travel and be with Ron as well as he's home by himself, and just pray that it would be an opportunity for her just to be there and to just experience the hope that we have in Jesus. God, we thank you for all that you do for us. Thank you for your love for us, and pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So a couple of weeks ago, I asked you to tell me about a time that you felt loved, but I want to ask a slightly different question today of how you feel loved, and both how you feel and how you show love. So I'm thinking kind of, some of you are probably familiar with the 5 love languages. If you're not, there's quality time, words of affirmation, physical touch, gift giving or gift receiving, and acts of service. So which of those 5, or maybe one that's not included in that list, do you feel most loved when you experience that? George.
I think by greeting people. Like this church, I love because everybody's so polite. They greet you with your first name and so forth, and honor that. So that's the way I feel most loved, and I also feel like when I reciprocate, I'm in love out.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay.
I think that's both for me.
I will say words. I like words, gifts, a combination of them.
Okay. My wife and I are about as polar opposite as you can be, because she's words of affirmation, and I mean I'll take a compliment, but it's it doesn't really. I appreciate them, but it's not how I feel loved. But I'm very physical, I like hugs and kisses and hand holding and that kind of thing. And she's like, if you never touched me a day in my life, I'd be just fine with that, And because that's how our families grew up. My family was very, touchy-feely, and hers were not. And so it's funny that we've worked through that, and how we show love and feel love in that instance.
We live in a world now where everybody, hello, how are you, bye-bye, and I think I really appreciate when people pay attention. Maybe come over and hug you, say hi, what's going on, and mean it, rather than, hey, how are you?
is different for different people.
Okay.
So, like, I personally, my family, I want them to say a word of kindness and acknowledge the things that I do for them, as well as give me affection. Whereas people, like, in here in the church, I kind of get a little, like, we've talked about this in our WOW group, that, you know, when you get a compliment, sometimes you don't want the compliment because you just want it to be what it is, and you don't want to take credit for it because, but at the same time, it's nice to be acknowledged, but it just more or less paying it forward. Like, that's when I do something for somebody, I do it with all that I have, and then I want you to just do it for someone else. I don't need anything in return.
Yeah. So the reason I ask this is because, you know, obviously we all have different ways that we feel loved or give love, and even like Tina said, it differs, you know, if your friends or family versus, you know, your neighbor or church person. But, you know, there's a sense in which all of us, you know, give and receive love in different ways. And so, regardless of how we prefer to receive that love, we fondly remember certain moments when we do feel valued, whatever that love that looks like. In our session today, in our prayer reference, this is a story that most of us probably heard. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan. And you wouldn't really think of this as a parable about love, but really it is to an extent of the Samaritan showing love to somebody who would have not probably showed him love, or at least expected any kind of love from him. And we'll talk about why that is in a minute. But as we talk through this and listen to this parable, I really kind of want you to try to, if you can, imagine you're listening to, you're in this crowd listening to the parable for the first time. Because Jesus' teaching on this can be really revolutionary, specifically of how we love even when it's not reciprocated, or how we love when we know it can't be paid back. And to look at how this person who's beaten up and left for dead in a ditch is impacted by the different people who come along his way. And so as you watch, I want to just consider these following questions, always kind of try to give you touch points to look for. So what kind of heart does Jesus want his followers to have? What does it look like to love our neighbors? And why do we love our neighbors? Because that's really what this parable is born out of, is somebody comes and says, hey, what do I do to earn eternal life? And Jesus gives them a whole list of things, and he says, well, how do I know who's my neighbor and how to love them? And so that really is born out of that question. And so kind of look for those as JD talks through our series this evening, and then we'll talk about some of these questions of how we feel and show love. So turn to the video, and then we'll discuss after.
We are almost through with the first part of Luke. Jesus has been performing a lot of miracles, signs, we call them, that demonstrate the kind of kingdom that Jesus is bringing. By the time we get into chapter 10, Jesus has revealed a lot about himself. And so Peter, representing all the disciples, has acknowledged Jesus to be the Christ, the promised Messiah. In this session, we're going to see Jesus do an initial commissioning of his disciples for the ministry he wants them to carry on after he's gone. In the first 12 verses of chapter 10, Jesus sends out 72 of his followers to heal the sick and preach the kingdom. By the way, that number 72 is significant because in the famous table of nations in Genesis 10, there were 72 nations listed. So 72 here is a way of indicating that Jesus' gospel is going to be for the entire world. And so the disciples go out and they do this ministry, and when they get back, as part of their debriefing, Jesus tells them a parable that illustrates the kind of heart that he wants to see developed in all those of us who represent him. It all starts, this parable all starts in verse 25 with a trap question that was asked by a Pharisee, by a lawyer. Here's what it says, verse 25. Then an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus, saying, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Verse 26, Jesus said, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" Verse 27, the lawyer answered, Well, you got to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and then love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly. Jesus told him, do this and you will live. Y'all, I almost want to laugh out loud when I read that. I mean, that is a big old do, right? Right, yeah, just love God with all your heart, your soul, your strength, and mind every second of every day. Make God the highest passion of your heart, the one you think about first and foremost in every decision you make. And also, while you're at it, love everybody else as much as you love yourself. Care about your neighbor's needs as much as you do your own. Rejoice in their happiness as much as you do yours. Worry about their futures and weep about their sorrows as if they were your own. And when you do that, then you'll be ready for heaven. Anybody here in the group want to raise their hand right now and say, oh yeah, that describes my week? Yeah, that's how you would describe me. Anybody's hand raised? Of course not. Verse 29, watch this. The lawyer, wanting to justify himself, that's a key word, asked Jesus, well, then who is my neighbor? And so Jesus tells a story that shows that this commandment has no limits, that true followers of Jesus have, and here's a key word, have an instinct that makes them move toward need and toward suffering wherever and whenever they encounter it. You see, let me back up for just a minute and set this conversation in the larger context of Jesus' overall message. The main problem with how this lawyer phrased his question is that there is nothing we can do to inherit eternal life. If there had been something we could do, Jesus would not have had to come to rescue us. The whole point of Jesus' life is that we could not earn our way to heaven, so Jesus came to do it for us by living the life that we were supposed to live and then dying the death that we were condemned to die in our place. This religious leader, this lawyer, was looking for a set of to-do items on a list that he could perform and check off. But read this parable primarily as a description of the kind of love and generosity that grows in your heart naturally after you've met Jesus and been saved by grace. Verse 30, here's the parable. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and so this man fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him, beat him up, and fled, leaving him half dead. Now, verse 31, a priest happened to be going down that road, but when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Now, when I learned this story when I was in Sunday school on, flannel graph, we were always really, really hard on this priest. I think I can even remember the expression on the face of the flannel graph character that my teacher put up to represent the priest. He had this pious, I'm better than you look on his face, and we just assumed that he was stepping over a bleeding man on his way to the donut shop or something like that. But Jesus's audience would have immediately recognized a few things about this priest that would have made him a much more sympathetic character. First of all, the Jericho Road was extremely dangerous. It was literally called in those days the Pass of Blood because of all those places that robbers could hide. The one rule on the Jericho Road is you don't stop. It'd be like driving through a really dangerous part of town late at night. You don't just stop because if you do, you might get mugged. Second, if this priest was returning from Jerusalem, that means that he had just finished up his purification rites at the temple there, which were required in order for him to be able to perform his religious duties back in his hometown. And that purification was a 7-day process. And according to Jewish law, if you touched a dead man after you'd been purified, well, you had to go back to the temple in Jerusalem and purify yourself all over again, which would take another 7 days. So in other words, for this priest to stop and help this guy would have been both dangerous and massively inconvenient because this guy was likely to die, which might have been a decent excuse by this priest, except that this man on the side of the road is dying. And what Jesus is asking is, isn't a man's life worth at least a week of this priest's time? Verse 32, in the same way a Levite, when he arrived at the place and saw him, he also passed by on the other side. Verse 33, but a Samaritan on his journey came up to him. When he saw the man, he had compassion. A couple of things here. First, if you're familiar with the Bible at all, you know that Samaritans were the ethnic and religious enemies of the Jews. The Samaritans were the half-Jew, half-Gentile offspring that came about when the Assyrians, who had conquered the northern part of Israel, forced the Jews there to intermarry with them. The Jews thought of Samaritans as racially defiled, half-bloods, or for you Harry Potter fans, mudbloods. They were extremely racist toward the Samaritans. The Samaritans, for their part, weren't really that pleasant of a people either. They built their their own alternate temple, and they said that their altar, not the one in Jerusalem, but their altar was the true altar of God. Samaria was right in the middle of the northern and southern parts of Israel, but the Jews hated Samaritans so much that if they were traveling from north to south in Israel, they would walk around Samaria, even though it added a couple of days to their journey, just to avoid contact with those dirty Samaritans. Just touching a Samaritan, they believe, would make you defiled. But shockingly, in Jesus' story, this Samaritan, when he sees the bleeding Jewish man, he feels compassion. And by the way, the word compassion is one of my favorite Greek words. Splagma refers to a pity that just rises up from the core of who you are. It's like this gut-wrenching compassion, which is why it sounds like vomit, splagma, right? Verse 34, he went over to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on olive oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him. When I come back, I'll reimburse you for whatever extra you spend. He paid for the guy, in other words, out of his own account. He even opened up a line of credit for him so that whatever he needed would be addressed. What do you notice here, by the way, about the Samaritan's love? It's unrestrained, it's limitless. He literally opens a line of credit and says, whatever it takes to get this guy back to health, put that on me. Then Jesus asked, verse 36, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? Verse 37, the one who showed mercy to him, the lawyer said. By the way, did you see that? This Jewish lawyer cannot even bring himself to say the Samaritan. He just says, that one who showed mercy to him. And then Jesus told him, you go and do the same. In this story, Jesus shows us what it means to love our neighbors, and then why those of us who've been saved by grace will do it instinctively. So number 1, what it means to love our neighbors. Let me subdivide the what question into the who, the when, and the how much. Okay, so first, who do we love? And the answer is anyone we see in need. The Samaritan and the Jew could not have had less in common. And see, it's natural for us to help those who are like us, those with whom we have an affinity, or those that we think are in some way deserving of our help. But Jesus taught that we are to help those, especially those with whom we have little in common, even those we might consider our enemies, or those we think are unworthy of our help, which could mean those on the other side of the political aisle from you, or the immigrant family living in your neighborhood, or the boss at work who is taking you for granted and consistently failed to acknowledge your efforts, or the person who sits on the other side of the classroom who is just so different from you, or the friend who betrayed you. It also includes people around the world and cultures vastly different from your own. It's literally anybody in need, regardless of who they are, or how they got there, or whether you have any personal connection to them or not, which leads me to the when question. When do we show love? Jesus' answer in this parable is whenever you see the need. Listen, we come up with all kinds of excuses for why not to help somebody in need. We say things like, well, I don't mind helping people who are truly victims of injustice, but those people over there, that group over there, they don't really deserve our help because their suffering is their fault. If anybody ever had an excuse not to show kindness, it was this Samaritan. It serves you right, you bigot. You sow the wind, reap the whirlwind. But the Samaritan showed mercy because he was moved with splagma, with compassion. Proverbs 3:27 says, do not withhold good from your neighbor when it is in your power to act, which means if you have the opportunity to act, you have the responsibility to act. Third, how much love should we show? Well, again, based on the story of the Good Samaritan, Jesus' answer is until we are sharing in the burden ourselves. This Samaritan put himself at great personal risk and then used his own money to meet the need. The essence of love is when you begin to share in someone else's burden. Listen, you cannot meet every need of every person in the world, but to love somebody means to share in their pain, which means that through your generosity, you enter into their pain to the point that you begin to feel some of it yourself. Paul said in the book of Galatians, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. In other words, the way you love like Jesus is to give to the point that you are sharing in the burden. And until you yourself are feeling some of the weight of that burden, well, you're not really loving or giving like Jesus. Friend, listen, this is the core of what it means to follow Jesus. And let me say something really serious here. Christians often function like that priest and the Levite in Jesus' story. We're all into our religious duties, reading our Bibles and tithing and volunteering and going to small groups. We do all of our duties. But when you actually look at our lives, there's very little sharing in the burdens of others or truly giving ourselves away. Yeah, we throw our money at things. We give a little off the top. But the essence of following Jesus is entering into the pain of others. Okay, so that's what it means to love our neighbors, right? So now let's end with why those of us who are saved by grace love our neighbors instinctively. Jesus puts an interesting twist into the story. The twist is he uses a Samaritan as the hero. Did he really need to do that? So here's the question that you need to consider. If the main point of the story was simply that we should love anybody we see in need, well, Jesus didn't need to make a Samaritan the hero to make that point, right? But instead, Jesus made a Samaritan, whom they considered to be their enemy, the hero of this story. Why? Well, let me ask you a second question. Who do you think is supposed to represent this lawyer and you and me in this story? Which character represents us? See, we typically read this story, we say, I know. I'm like the busy priest and the uncaring Levite, but I should really be more like the Good Samaritan. But what if the person that you and I are supposed to most identify with in this story is not the priest or the Levite or the Good Samaritan? What if the person we are most supposed to identify with is the guy bleeding on the side of the road? And what if somebody who had every reason to hate us and to be our enemy instead chose to put himself into danger to rescue us? What if the true Good Samaritan is Jesus, who took upon himself the suffering that we had caused ourselves, who stopped to help us, who not only put himself in danger, but actually yielded his body up to real death to save us, and who then gives us an unlimited credit at the bank of his grace to cover whatever else we need, who promises to supply all of our need according to his riches? And what if Jesus did that even though our situation was our own fault and we did not deserve any help? See, if that's true, and we are the man on the side of the road who got rescued, well, see, that changes how we approach others in need, right? You see, Jesus is not giving the lawyer a new rule as much as he is making him aware of a new reality. Each of us had made God our enemy, and instead of hating us, God saw us and he felt splagma, compassion. You and I are saved, you see, because Jesus stopped, because he turned aside to help us, because he got involved in our pain, even though he didn't have to. And it is simply not possible for you and me to experience that kind of grace and not develop an instinct to show that kind of grace to others. And see, if you haven't developed that instinct, Jesus is asking, have you really experienced my grace? Are you even saved? Jesus is not giving this lawyer a new standard to reach so that he can earn heaven, because there's no standard that we could reach to earn heaven. He's saying that God saved us by a gift of outlandish grace. And if we understand that, the way that we will show that is by showing outlandish grace to others. The indicator light on your dashboard that shows that you have experienced the grace of God is that you develop an instinct to show it to others, because, you see, those who believe the gospel always become like the gospel. And so, if you have experienced the grace of Jesus and the gospel, well, like Jesus said to the lawyer, go and do likewise.
So the story starts out with this expert in the law coming to Jesus, and Jesus telling him that the way to inherit eternal life is simple. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And of course, as JD enumerated, that is harder to do than we might think it is. But before we get to the parable, I want to ask the question, we know as Christians that we can't earn our salvation. But I think sometimes we still kind of inherently or implicitly ask, what must I do? So I wanted to ask, what ways are we still tempted to do in order to earn grace? What are the things that we think that we have to do to earn our salvation or earn God's grace?
Well, in general, love like Jesus did.
think being too content,
Okay, what do you mean by that?
well, by not doing, you don't have to earn it, but you shouldn't be like not trying or not doing stuff.
Okay.
Be good, you know. I don't think any of us have ever committed murder or robbed a bank, but not, maybe we've told a lie, maybe we've cheated somebody. So a lot of people, when they feel if they're good, and if they go to church, that's enough.
Yeah, I think like I was thinking about you get the little gold star on your attendance chart at Sunday school as a kid, and you get all the stars, and that's great. I mean, I think it's a great lesson to teach kids to be, but I think that kind of bleeds over into our adult lives. Like I got to get the stars, and I got to do all the things, and if I get enough stars, then I make it.
Well, Jesus does say, obey his commands. That's how you prove you love him. That doesn't mean that you're trying to earn your salvation. You're trying to show your love.
Right.
And trust that he has, the reason he gave the commandment is for your best interest. And so, obedience.
Yeah, to be sure, there are things that we are called to do,
Yes.
certainly as Christians, but in the sense of, I think oftentimes we think, well, we'll earn our way if we do those things versus in response to what he's called us to.
I think that's why you have to preach the gospel to yourself every day. Because he says every day die to yourself. So, because you can get caught up in the dues of what it means to be a follower of Christ, but it has nothing to do with the dues. It always comes back to the doer, which is Jesus. And I think that's why you have to every single day preach the gospel to yourself and realize that you were bankrupt. You were bankrupt and you realized it, and he paid your debt, but never going back to the thought that, I'm good now. You always have to remember that you're bankrupt without him. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, that was a big, when I'm talking with Chandler about baptism, this past year, and that was a big, how do I communicate that it's not about doing, but when Jesus becomes your Lord, it is going to change what you do. It's like, you're not earning it, but you are going to be different as a result of it. And so that was, a hard concept to communicate to him. And I think, to all of us, it can be a hard concept to really, truly understand and rest in that. Because I think we get caught up in that doing mindset.
Well, faith without works is dead.
Yes, yeah.
That's part of it.
Yeah. So as we turn from there, we turn to then this story of this Samaritan. And as Jesus, he presents these two, the priest and the Levite, who are the good religious leaders that you would expect would stop and be the people. But of course, then it is this Samaritan. And he goes to great lengths to help this guy in need. And as likewise, we are called as Christians to go to similar lengths. But I wanted to say, if you had, and you don't need to name a name, but would you say that you have an instinct to help people in need? Or who do you know that is naturally drawn to people who are suffering? And the reason I want you to think of a person, or if you yourself are wired this way, what have you noticed about how that person loves others and that we could try to emulate? So maybe to summarize that a little better, what are the qualities that we should have as Christians that help us to go to those places of limitless love on our instinct?
Qualities?
Yeah, what qualities do you see in a person who is readily helpful to other people?
Their willingness to help.
Okay.
They're always willing to help, no matter what.
The giving of self.
Okay. Tell me, explain that a little bit. Maybe.
Well, Jesus was a perfect example of giving his life for us, right? I think sometimes we neglect, whether it be the busyness of our lives, whether it be just the idea that we don't want to be bothered. So I think many times within the world that we live in such a me society that they're not willing to give of themselves in order to be able to be helpful to others.
Patient?
I'd say joy. They have a deep joy to help. It's like something that they're just proud to do. And like they don't make you feel bad that they're helping you.
You have to notice the person at the need. You have to be a person who notices a need.
I'm great at noticing needs like an hour after I was supposed to have noticed it. Yeah. That's why you might notice I often pray at the end of our service that that God would give us opportunities to do something, but also that we'd have the eyes to see the opportunities. Because I think God gives us the opportunities all the time. I just don't happen to have the eyes to see them until maybe it's too late a lot of times. I think a lot of times, I think it's just creating the space to be a helpful person. I think I had a roommate in college, and college is a crazy time, and always up late doing homework or doing some nonsense thing because you're in a dorm of a bunch of other teenage or early 20s guys. And I remember he would always try to finish his work early just so that he could be available to help. And I always was impressed by that because I was not one who finished my work early. I was probably a bit of a procrastinator, still am in some regards. But I think it's just sometimes just creating that space to do, because if your schedule is so full or you've got all these things going, it's hard to be helpful. And I think that if we can create that space to see the opportunities, create the space to put aside other things to help other people, that's half the battle right there. And to just solve that busyness problem that we're constantly facing, to be available to help others. I think the other one that I see is, I think of myself, I often am like a worst case scenario guy, and okay, if I help this person, it's kind of like if you give a mouse a cookie, if you help this person, then they're going to need this, and they're going to need this, and they're going to need this. It's like, well, I got to stop somewhere. But that's not what we see in this parable. We see this limitless love, and I think that is a big struggle of mine. Is like, okay, I see a need, but it's going to require this, and this of me. Okay, that's too much. Where that's not what we're called to. We're called to have this love that doesn't look at the limit, but looks at the limitlessness of grace that we have received. And so I don't know if you're like me in that regard, but I think if I were to make this an instinct, as I try to make this an instinct to love better, those are the two things that I think creating this space and then not worrying about the limits of what it's going to require of me, but just being, open with generosity and those kind of things. So upon closer examination, we see, like I said, these two other guys besides the Samaritan. We see this priest and this Levite. And like JD said, we kind of hear this story and think, oh, the priest is just, he's just a jerk, he didn't really care, the Levite, whatever. But, in their story, this would have been like, a preacher, as a priest, or as the Levites, like an elder or a good Sunday school teacher. These are good religious guys that are, known for doing the right thing. But in this instance, we see that another layer on top of this priest, that it would have required him, to go through these cleanliness rituals and all these kind of other things, and all these, behind the scenes limits. And so I wanted to ask, when are you least likely, like this priest, to go out of your way to help someone, and why?
So for me, it'd be the least likely when I'm focused on myself. But also, we'll say if I'm helping someone else already, maybe that preacher was going to do a sermon, and there was hundreds of people waiting on him, so we kind of weighed his things maybe. But sometimes if I'm already helping someone, my eyes won't be so open to someone else because I'm focused on, well, not myself for once, but.
Yeah.
I think my wife and I, we have a hard time with people that always have their hand out, that they won't even try to get a job or they won't try to do anything for themselves. And I'm reading about this RN that was divorced by her husband. She had a young baby, not a young baby, a young child in grade school. And she'd get up every morning and drive the kid to school. From the car that she spent the night in, goes to to work, gets a shower, and then works on the hospital floor. And then after that, she has to go home, pick the kid up at school, because she can't afford any kind of daycare or anything. And then they drive around someplace and park for the night. And I'm thinking, that kind of person really needs help. But there's so many that they don't do anything for themselves. They just put their hand out. And I have a hard time trying to decide what to do, where to go. You know? So, in my particular case, there isn't the one-on-one, but you just go to like Salvation Army or Orlando Rescue Mission or somebody else that can vet these people and decide what's true, what isn't. You know? They'll feed them and then, see you tomorrow. I have a hard time. This guy in the story, he was legitimately beaten, and he needed help. These people just, I don't know, they have a hard time.
No, okay. Dave?
So shortly after we moved out to where we are right now, neighbor across the fence, he grows fruit trees, starts with a P, not persimmon, what is it? Pomegranate. And, oh yeah, papaya, maybe it was papaya. And he grows these trees. And I asked him, I said, and I was just making small talk. I didn't really care. How do you grow these trees? And he said, I don't really want to talk to you. I wish you hadn't moved here. So, there's been several times that I've asked myself, and I'm not going to say his name, it's not Matt and Jan. It's on the other side of the fence. If he had a need, would I do it? I'd like to think I would. But boy, I don't want to.
Yeah.
Because I think I'm a pretty good neighbor.
I'm sure you are.
Yeah. George?
I think you have to be aware of your surroundings when you're out in the community and so forth. There are a lot of opportunities that you can take advantage of by helping people and so forth. Example, a couple of them, like I was in Publix once and a lady had 2 cans of, well, I don't even know what it was, but she put it on a conveyor belt and goes by. And then now it's time to pay up, and she's got a little bag that opens up and she's counting these pennies and the nickels and dimes and all that. And, I was going like, honey, put that back in there. I got that covered, don't worry. And, bag your stuff and all that fun. She goes, oh, you don't have to do that. I know that, but I want to. But just make me happy by accepting it. Yeah. And that's another thing. Sometimes they don't want to accept it. Or like your neighbor, that's the guy you want to talk to. The guy that says he doesn't want to talk, but that's a bunch of baloney. Because that's reverse psychology. But, and then another time, I was in, I don't know what kind of store and everything, what's some toys or something like that. And the mother's got the kids and she's got a bag of groceries and all kinds of stuff. She's just overburdened. And the kids scream, I want a phone, I want a phone, I want a phone, and she's like, I can't afford a phone. I says, see that kid over there? This is for his phone. Don't worry, lady, it's free today. But, the opportunities there, sometimes you just have to recognize it and act on it.
I actually think that if you look at the whole story, the whole chapter, what Dave is talking about, and I forget what this young man's name is over there, but it actually talks about just what they kind of like, Dave meets somebody who doesn't want to talk to him. And the whole concept was that he sent out the 72 and he said, if they don't welcome you, you dust off your shoes and you move on. And that's part of the story. And then you go on and Jesus is saying, if you know, I know the Father, and if you know me, then you'll know the Father. And we reveal these things to you. So the story all goes, you have to read the whole chapter because
I think that it alludes back to the fact that there are going to be people that don't want your help, that are not willing. Then there are going to be other people like Mary and Martha, where he's going to go next, and they're at the feet of Jesus, and they're just so into it. And I think we're going to see that throughout our Christian walk, and we can't, like Dave said, do you want to help him? Sure, but if he doesn't want the help, you're still there, but it's okay. People will be people, and they will go on their way, and that's how sometimes you can't worry about whether or not they're going to continue down the path they are. You help them and let Jesus figure it out.
And I think too, being available to maybe be there when they do finally need the help.
Yeah.
That maybe it's just not the right moment to help your neighbor in that instance, but maybe there'll come a time where he feels differently or whatever. Yeah, I'm sure it would. So I want to walk through this. Let's see, we just have, we might run short on time, so I want to see what's going on here. Okay, we're going to number 6, because JD asked and answered these 3 questions that really kind of sum up this story. He says, the question of who do we love? We love anyone we see in need, especially those we disagree with. When do we love? We love whenever we see a need. And how much love should we show? We love until we're sharing in the burden ourselves. And I wanted to ask, which of these questions and answers do you struggle with the most? And how can you remind yourself to love whenever, wherever, and whomever?
I think in this day and age, it's hard to know how much love to show to people. Because, like the one person said, we've gotten in a habit of being very superficial with each other. And if you come across as real and maybe a little bit much, people are kind of thrown off by it nowadays. So I don't think that's definitely one to struggle with.
So just this week, I had a guy, a friend from Texas, hit me up, say he's going through some hard times. He made some poor choices, living arrangements with his kids and stuff. Says, all my kids are still with me, so that's the only thing that really matters to me, but I am struggling. So he's like, can I get $50 to get gas and food? So I sent him 100. He's like, oh my goodness, thank you. And then 3 hours later, I guess his tire blows up. And he's like, well, I just spent all the money you gave me on a tire. I was like, totally understand. He's like, can I get 20 for gas? So I sent him double what he asked for again. 2 days goes by and he asks for more money. I'm like, unfortunately, I will send you whatever you ask for, but this is going to be it. Because I'm $200 in 3 days. At what point do I stop? So, I don't know.
No.
Should I send him more money?
No. Well, it's funny that this was the lesson today, because somebody called the church today, and every now and then we get somebody that's, it's like their life's like a country song, all these things happen, and I had not even got the words out of my mouth that we really don't have anything to help with that, and then like click, like it just, the line went dead. I'm like, oh my goodness, like I couldn't even get the words out before it was like moving on to the next, and so, just like, I think in instances like that, it was just like, there was no, it was just a handout at that point, and I struggle with that a little bit. Jesse, you have anything?
I kind of, on this last part, how much should we love, I kind of read that last part as, we should love until we're sharing the burden, not just, here, that was easy, $20, should be able to do more than that.
Yeah, I like that language of sharing in the burden ourselves, because I think sometimes we can just throw money at it and we're not really participating.
Right, that's easy, right?
Yeah, and so it kind of goes back to talking about, I think a few weeks ago, of like this idea of loving sacrificially, or putting till it requires something of us, that actually costs us something. And I think that's when it's hard to show love, because it requires a deep investment of us beyond just throwing money at something or quick fix. I think that's the kind of for the Samaritan guy, the Lord on his donkey, took him there and paid for his bills, and there was a deep investment. He's going to come back and check on him, and I think that's the kind of love that we tend to struggle with, is that we're going to require a ongoing long-term investment on our part. Judy?
One thing that we haven't considered is that some people will turn us down just because they are embarrassed or whatever. One time when my kids were little, all of us were sick, so all six of us were sick with the flu. And one of them turned into scarlet fever, and she had a fever of 105.
Wow.
And I know if this person had called me on the phone and said, how can we help? I would have said, oh, we're doing just fine. I mean, we were all in bed. There wasn't too much we could do. We were fine. and she passed by that stage and just came over with a great big kettle of soup and started cleaning my house. And that has really stuck with me all these years because I think we take advantage of the fact sometimes that our offerings are denied when in fact we ought to just dig in there and do it.
I heard somebody years ago say something like, don't ask how can I help? Just do the helpful thing. Because most of the time they'll say, oh, we're fine, especially after like a funeral or a death or something like that. Yeah, like how can you help? Oh, okay. No, just go and do it and they'll be appreciated anyway. So, I guess good much. Jim.
The severity of this, this man was bleeding and real trouble and they just passed him by.
Mm-hmm.
So the third was certainly meant to be. That's what we do here when we have somebody. It's like last Sunday, we had a man come in, pulled off the road. Bill and I saw him immediately in the second service. And he wanted a charger for a phone. He said, that's all I need. Okay, but then he told his whole life story of what else was going on, and then he pulled in because he needed to go to church. So hopefully he'll be back soon.
Yeah.
Just a question.
Yeah.
Maybe I missed it, I'm not sure. I'm trying to get more help, so. But do we do anything as a group to go out in the community and help people with the church?
We haven't really done historically, aside from like things like Love Groveland, because I think for a long time we haven't been we've been in the middle of this road with nobody around us. That's one of the things I'm really excited about. Why all these homes growing toward us is because it's going to give us new opportunities to be in those communities and be a presence in their lives, and rather than just hoping people come to us, that we get the opportunity to go out people right in our neighborhoods and. So yeah, I mean, I think that's something that is a growth opportunity for us for sure.
We also have to be careful because there are professional people that do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
And they go from one church to another church to get more money, get more money, get more money. And it's not what it is.
So I don't have a last word or final thought tonight, other than just to say that this is not an easy thing. This requires a lot from us, and it requires a lot of thought, a lot of wisdom, a lot of discernment, and a lot of investment on our part. And so, Ken?
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Unrelated. This is a large auditorium, and we're spread out. And recently, I actually got a hearing aid to try to improve the hearing. But whenever you say something, you have excellent hearing, I know, because you hear everything that people say. But sometimes people speak so softly that we don't hear what they say. And I've had people tell me that they hesitate to say something then themselves for fear that it's already just been said.
Okay.
So anyway, maybe we could work.
Shout it out, people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I got a suggestion for that. We can all sit on that side. Everybody in one section. And then another thing real quick, if you're hesitant on helping people because you don't know if they're needed or not, I can only recommend the faith-based rehab program I went through was Adult and Teen Challenge. And it's filled with men, women, and also children campuses that choose to be there to better themselves through Jesus with God. And I would say it just goes a long way when you're helping people choosing help.
I think most of us here, if we knew there was a need for somebody, most of us here would volunteer to do it. Whether it was helping them or money, if it was a real need, most of us here would do it.
Yeah. And yeah, please don't hear anything tonight of like a guilt trip of like, you got to be better. Because this is an incredibly generous church, and with their time and their money and all those kinds of things. But just to encourage you to, love deeply and to love without that limit of how we invest in other people and how we, and I think, it's easy to create the strong man of like, the person off the street. Those do exist. But I'm talking about like the people in your lives, the people around you, your neighbors, maybe, but the people that you are already in your circle that you can help love and invest in, and as that grows, create that space and opportunity to love well. So.
Sometimes you just have to kill them with kindness, Dave.
Yeah. One kind of public service announcement before we go. Next week, we're gonna not have me in here because we always have our pumpkin carving night the Wednesday before our fall festival. So we will still have our meal, but we're gonna have the pumpkin carving, and then of course the fall festival is next Friday, and then following next Wednesday pumpkin, and then we'll have one more Wednesday finishing up Luke, and then Dave is going to start teaching again through his series in November. So just kind of wanted you to know what was coming up in the next few weeks. So, but with all that, we'll see you on Sunday.